The colonel's laugh cracked through his office like a rifle shot. Sharp, final. It wasn't amusement, it was dismissal. To Sergeant Elena Cruz, 27 years old and standing rigid at attention. It sounded less like laughter and more like a verdict already delivered. She had endured whispers before. Weak. Excuses. Just another soldier looking for an easy way out. But coming from Colonel Marcus Trent, a man whose reputation spanned 7 deployments and 3 decades of command. The sound cut deeper than any insult in the barracks. And yet, as the laugh faded into silence, Elena made a decision. She would show him the truth. And when she did, one question would hang over Red Mesa forever. How many scars can a soldier carry before the military finally sees them as real that morning? The sun baked the high desert plateau, painting the sandstone ridges in harsh red light. Elena's uniform was immaculate, pressed so sharp it could have drawn blood. She'd made sure of it if Trent was going to question her. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of finding a single crease out of place. Inside the colonel's office, medals gleamed from every wall. Photos of battlefield ceremonies crowded his desk. The stars and stripes hung tall behind him, casting long shadows across the floor. Trent didn't look up when she entered. His voice was gravel, steady from years of command. "Sergeant Cruz, I've reviewed your file. Solid record, commendations in communications and logistics. But I also see a troubling pattern." He tapped the folder with one finger. Eyes still locked on the paper. Repeated requests for medical leave. Only then did he raise his gaze. Gray eyes, cold as steel, fixed on her. "Care to explain why a 27-year-old soldier in peak condition needs so much time in the clinic?" Elena's pulse thudded in her ears. She'd rehearsed this moment, told herself she could explain without revealing too much. Still, her voice came out thinner than she liked. "Sir, I've been experiencing health issues that require monitoring. They're documented with the base medical staff." Trent leaned back in his chair, a slow smirk curling on his face. "Health issues? Sergeant, I've worn this uniform longer than you've been alive. I've seen every excuse in the book. Today's soldiers think they can whisper about some mysterious condition and earn special treatment." The words burned. Elena clenched her fists against the seams of her trousers. She wanted to shout. Instead, she forced calm into her tone. "Sir, with respect, this is not an excuse. I've never shirked my duties. I've carried my weight in every deployment." Trent's eyes narrowed. He lifted the file again, flipping through the pages with exaggerated slowness. "From where I sit, Sergeant, it looks like you're trying to game the system. Invisible ailments, headaches, fatigue." He dropped the folder onto the desk with a thud. "What's next? Are you going to tell me you brought home some invisible wound from Arkan Ridge?" The name froze her breath. Arkan Ridge. No one had spoken those words to her face in years. Officially, the incident had been buried classified reports, sealed testimony, whispered condolences. Elena's jaw tightened. She could still hear the explosion, still feel the desert floor shake, still taste the copper sting of blood in her mouth. But Colonel Trent wasn't interested in ghosts from the valley. His smirk told her he saw nothing but another soldier playing the system. And, for the first time since the blast, Elena realized she could no longer stay silent. Would she keep hiding her scars behind perfect uniforms and clipped salutes? Or would she strip away the facade and force Colonel Trent to confront the truth written across her body before we continue? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Drop your city or country below. And don't forget to hit subscribe to Stories Unseen so you won't miss the next powerful military story. Colonel Marcus Trent rose slowly from behind his desk, boots grinding against the stone floor like weight on a coffin lid. He circled until he stood only a breath away from Sergeant Elena Cruz. His voice dropped low, like a blade dragged across steel. "I've seen real soldiers with real wounds," he said. "Men and women who left pieces of themselves on the battlefield. You." He glanced at her pressed sleeves, her straight posture. "You look fine to me, and I can smell a faker from a mile away." The words weren't just skeptical, they were an insult carved into her service, her sacrifice, her silence. Elena's hands trembled, though she forced them clasped behind her back. "Sir, I understand your concern, but my medical needs are genuine," she said, each word quieter than the last, as though she was speaking into a storm. "Genuine?" Trent's laugh cracked the air again, crueler than before. He spread his arms toward her. "You stand tall, you speak clear, you don't limp, you don't shake. So what am I supposed to believe, Sergeant, that you're haunted by some phantom injury that only shows itself when it's convenient?" That laugh dismissive. Hollow snapped something inside her. She had spent years biting down pain, fighting through migraines that blinded her, through ringing in her ears that drowned out orders. She had stitched her life together with silence, thinking professionalism would shield her. But the colonel's laughter stripped it all away. "Sir," she whispered, her voice brittle but steady, "appearances can deceive." Trent narrowed his eyes, lips curling into the smug smile of a man who thought he'd already won. He strode back to his chair, lowering himself with theatrical calm. "Is that so? Then enlighten me. What mysterious ailment of yours demands so much attention, yet leaves not a single mark?" For a long moment, Elena said nothing. She held her breath as if weighing two lives in her hands, the life she'd kept hidden under layers of fabric and forced smiles, and the life that could be stripped bare in a second. The colonel didn't care. He launched into another lecture, a sermon about duty and responsibility, his words pounding like fists on a locked door. But Elena was done listening. Her decision came like the slow pull of a trigger. She inhaled deeply, steadied herself, and moved her hands to the collar of her uniform. With deliberate, measured movements, she began to undo the buttons one by one. Trent blinked, confusion cutting through his arrogance. "Sergeant, what exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice carried a hint of alarm now, the certainty cracking. "You said appearances can deceive," Elena replied. Her voice had changed firmer now, threaded with steel. "You want proof? I'll show you." As she drew the fabric aside, the first glint of scar tissue caught the light. Trent's eyes widened, the smugness sliding off his face, replaced by something raw and unguarded. And Elena knew the truth she had buried since Arkan Ridge was about to explode into daylight. The air in Colonel Trent's office turned heavy as Elena Cruz pulled her uniform shirt aside. For a moment, the room seemed to forget how to breathe. Across her chest and down her side stretched a map of raised, twisted scars, some thin as razor cuts, others wide and jagged like lightning frozen in flesh. The marks weren't just wounds. They were evidence, carved into her body, of fire and steel tearing through human skin. Silence swallowed the space. Colonel Trent's jaw went slack, his dismissive smirk erased in an instant. What replaced it was something harder for him to control: shame. "These," Elena said quietly, voice flat, steady, "are from the IED blast at Arkan Ridge. 4 years ago, my convoy was hit while delivering comms gear to an isolated outpost. 3 soldiers died on impact." She shifted her stance, exposing more scars running across her ribs and back. "I lived. Barely. The medics pulled out most of the fragments, but not all." Trent's lips parted, but no sound came. "There are 32 pieces of metal still inside me," she continued. "Some rest so close to vital arteries they can't be touched. When they shift, I don't get to choose the outcome: blinding headaches, dizziness, temporary hearing loss. Sometimes worse." Her words fell like steel on concrete, each one cutting deeper than the last. Trent's voice finally surfaced, brittle, stripped of authority. "Sergeant, I had no idea." "No, sir," Elena replied, calmly beginning to fasten her uniform again. "You didn't, because I don't parade it. I don't weaponize my pain. I still serve, in spite of it. Her hands moved with deliberate precision, sealing the scars back under fabric. But not before the truth had burned itself into the colonel's mind. The man who had mocked her minutes earlier now looked hollow, pale, as though the walls lined with medals and flags suddenly accused him instead. He sank into silence, staring down at the file that just yesterday had convinced him he understood everything about Sergeant Elena Cruz. The doctors at Fort Clay told me survival was a coin toss, Elena said, her voice gathering strength. Most don't make it past the battlefield. I did, and when I recovered, I chose to return. Not because it was easy, because service was my decision. She let the words hang, every syllable pressing into the quiet. The appointments you questioned, they're not for convenience. They track the fragments still lodged in me, to ensure one doesn't migrate into something that ends my service or my life. Colonel Trent rose slowly, his movement stripped of the certainty that had defined him minutes before. He walked toward the window, shoulders slumped, hands clasped behind his back. For the first time, Elena saw hesitation in the man carved from battlefield legend. He had mocked her, dismissed her, judged her. Now, he could no longer deny her truth. But if scars could silence even a colonel, what would happen when Elena's story spilled beyond that office into a world where invisible wounds were still treated as weakness? Sergeant Cruz, Colonel Trent said finally, his back still turned toward the window. His voice had lost its edge, stripped of command and certainty. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Elena held her posture, eyes fixed forward. Sir, my medical information is private. I never believed I had to bear my scars just to justify medical appointments already cleared by the staff. And much of what happened at Arkan Ridge remains classified. I was instructed to keep the specifics to myself. When Trent turned, the transformation in his face startled her. The arrogance was gone, dissolved into something closer to shame. I owe you an apology, Sergeant, a profound apology. Elena's shoulders loosened slightly, but she didn't break attention. Sir, I understand the concern about soldiers abusing the system. That's a legitimate worry for any commander. No, Trent cut in, shaking his head. His voice carried a weight heavier than before. There's no excuse for what I just did. The first shift came within days. The same colonel who had once laughed in her face was now walking into the medical facility at Red Mesa, asking to meet with the doctors and nurses who treated wounded soldiers. Dr. Rebecca Alvarez, the chief medical officer, later pulled Elena aside during a routine scan. You won't believe this, Alvarez said, lowering her voice. The colonel sat in my office for 2 hours. He asked about traumatic brain injuries, chronic pain. PTSD took notes like he was back at officer school. And he asked specifically about you, Sergeant Cruz. He wanted to understand what you deal with every single day so he could do better by you, and by others. Elena felt heat rise in her face, gratitude mixed with unease. Ma'am, I don't want to be the poster child for invisible wounds. I just want to serve, Dr. Alvarez smiled gently. It's already helping. 5 soldiers came in this week for appointments they'd been avoiding, afraid of how their COs might treat them. They said word's getting around Colonel Trent is supporting medical care now. Elena carried those words with her back to her barracks, for the first time since Arkan Ridge. She felt like silence hadn't been wasted, that maybe her scars weren't just hers to carry. Weeks passed. True to his word, Colonel Trent launched mandatory training sessions across the base. Officers and senior NCOs were summoned to hear lectures about invisible wounds, lessons that the colonel himself often attended. At one session, he asked Elena to stand before the crowd and share her story. Her palms went slick with sweat. Standing in front of a room full of seasoned leaders, exposing the deepest vulnerabilities she had fought to bury, felt like another battlefield. But when she finished, the response stunned her. Major Jessica Torres approached, eyes wet. Sergeant, I owe you an apology. I've got a soldier in my unit who's been requesting medical leave. I thought she was dodging duty. Hearing you speak today, I realize I may have been making her life hell." Then Captain Anthony Ramirez, a veteran of 3 deployments, spoke quietly of his own hearing loss from repeated blasts. "I've been denying it for years, but you've made me realize it's time I stopped pretending." The sessions grew so popular they were expanded to include enlisted personnel. Elena found herself becoming something she had never planned to be: an advocate, a voice. One afternoon, after a session, a private, barely 19, approached her. His name tag read Kim. His hands shook as he spoke. "Sergeant Cruz, I was in a convoy that hit an IED on my first deployment. I wasn't injured, but ever since, I can't sleep. Nightmares. Panic attacks. I've been too scared to tell anyone. I don't want to be called weak." Elena looked into his eyes and saw the same fear she once carried. And in that moment, she realized her scars weren't just wounds. They were a bridge. But could Elena shoulder the weight of becoming the face of a silent army, the soldiers whose battles were hidden? But no less real Private Kim left the room with a shaky but genuine smile. The promise of an appointment clutched tighter than his rifle. Elena Cruz watched him go, realizing that for the first time since Arkan Ridge, her scars had served a purpose beyond her own survival. Meanwhile, Colonel Trent was undergoing his own transformation. The man who once mocked her now visited the medical wing weekly, not to interrogate, but to listen. He spoke with doctors, took notes like a cadet, and built an open-door policy for any soldier wrestling with wounds no one could see. Word spread fast across Red Mesa. The colonel himself had changed, and change meant safety. When Trent called Elena back to his office, the atmosphere was unrecognizable. The tension and suspicion had evaporated, replaced with warmth. "Sergeant Cruz," he said with a rare smile, "I've got good news. Your application for officer candidate school approved. Congratulations." Elena's throat tightened. She managed only, "Thank you, sir. I'm honored. You've earned it," Trent replied firmly. "What you've done here, turning your own battle into a way to lead others, that's the kind of officer the Army needs." By the time her departure date approached, the ripple effects had outgrown her story. Mandatory training on invisible wounds became standard across the base. Other commanders requested her materials. Soldiers who once kept silent began walking through clinic doors without fear. Then came General Hayes, her tone serious but measured. "I've been hearing remarkable things, Colonel, but I'm told the credit belongs here." She turned to Elena. Trent didn't hesitate. Her courage opened my eyes. Without Sergeant Cruz, none of this would exist. Elena felt a flicker of pride mixed with disbelief. She had never set out to be anyone's example. She only wanted to serve. Yet somehow, her scars had become blueprints for reform. 2 years later, Second Lieutenant Elena Cruz stood inside a Pentagon briefing room, the walls lined with flags and stars. Before her sat generals, admirals, senior civilians, the most powerful voices in the Department of Defense. They had come to hear about the Invisible Wounds initiative she had built from the ashes of her silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, clear. "When we started this program, the goal was simple: to make it safe for soldiers to seek the care they need. Today, I can tell you we've done that. And more. We've given them their voices back." As applause filled the room, Elena pressed her palm against her chest. Beneath the uniform, the scars remained. The shrapnel still shifted sometimes, sending sharp reminders through her body. But they no longer felt like burdens. They were proof. Proof she had survived. Proof that pain could be repurposed into hope. And as she looked out at the rows of leaders ready to carry her message forward, Elena Cruz understood the truth that had taken her years to learn. The strongest soldiers aren't the ones without scars. They're the ones who refuse to let those scars define them. Invisible wounds are still wounds, and when we choose to face them, we turn survival into strength.